JJ the CPA here, crash course for PPP forgiveness. Now, I want to tell you that I'm going to try and cram a bunch into this in a short period of time, but in the body of this video, you're going to find a link to a playlist for those of you that are employers, and for those that you are self-employed, I have a separate playlist, but these are a group of videos that talk in detail about these items. So if you have any questions, check out those playlists. And I'm putting a link to the SBA website, and it has specifically where you're going, everything related to PPP, including the forms, the instructions, the FAQs, etc. So I'm going to run through a plethora of items. Are you ready? So is there automatic forgiveness on PPP right now? No, it being November 23rd. Where do you file your PPP forgiveness application? With the bank that gave you the PPP. The only way that you can file it is through the bank. If your bank's not accepting it right now, that's okay. Why? Because when is the PPP forgiveness application due? 10 months after the end of your covered period. The covered period is 24 weeks from when you got the disbursement. So lots of time. When do you have to start making payments on your PPP loan if it's not forgiven? It would be no later than 12 months from when you got the disbursement. What if you haven't put in for PPP forgiveness application, or you haven't received the SBA approval of your PPP forgiveness? Then when do you have to start making payments? 12 months from the date of disbursement. How long does it take to get the PPP forgiveness application completed? When you put the forgiveness application into the bank, they have 60 days to review it, your documents, and then they make a recommendation to the SBA. The SBA then has 90 days from there to be able to approve or question or deny, but they have 90 days to come up with the final amount. If you got the EIDL grant, how is it that that affects the PPP forgiveness? On your application that you are filling out, you only reference it as it requests. You do not adjust the PPP forgiveness amount by that. Your bank does not adjust it. Only the SBA will adjust it. The SBA made that crystal clear. The interest, when does it start to accrue? It starts to accrue on the date of disbursement. It's a 1% loan regardless of when you got PPP. If you got it on or before June 5th, you have 2 years to pay it back. If you got it after June 5th, you have 5 years to pay it back. Who do you pay it back to if there's an unforgiveness amount? Directly to the bank. Can you pay back the EIDL grant? No. Can you pay back the EIDL grant given that it's going to reduce down your forgiveness? No. What year does PPP tax adjustment affect? 2020 only. What if you don't know your PPP forgiveness amount? How do you know what to adjust your taxes by? You will need to estimate and make a good faith effort of what you believe will be forgiven to then determine if you have a tax adjustment. What if you got all of your PPP loan forgiven? Is there a tax adjustment? No. What if you know that you're going to have all of your PPP loan forgiven, but it hasn't been forgiven by the time you file your tax return? If you believe that it will be 100% forgiven, then you will not make a tax adjustment. Does a self-employed have to make a tax adjustment? No. What is a self-employed individual for SBA purposes? A self-employed individual is only those that file a Schedule C or Schedule F. If you're an employer and you receive forgiveness, what then is your tax adjustment? Only the amount that was unforgiven. What if you have to estimate your PPP forgiveness amount? You file your tax return, but then later it's determined that your PPP forgiveness amount was not as much as you had thought. The IRS came out and said that if that was all done in good faith, you will make an estimate when you do your 2020, but then if the actual is different, you can just make the adjustment on your 2021 tax return or amend your 2020 tax return. Is the tax adjustment based on how much you pay yourself as a self-employed individual? No. A self-employed individual has no tax adjustment, period. Schedule C, Schedule F. How do you record this on QuickBooks if you recorded it as a liability when you got the money? So you got the money, you recorded it as a liability, how it should have been. Knowing what your forgiveness amount is going to be, you would then adjust your liability by that amount. You would debit the liability account and you would credit an other expense account. On your QuickBooks, if that's what you're using, I have set it up as a other expense down in the other expense type, and I've called it PPP adjustment. It's a negative expense. Is PPP unforgiven amount a tax adjustment? No, because you have to pay it back. Is the PPP forgiven amount income? No. The CARES Act indicated that it is not income. However, the IRS, who acknowledges that, indicated that under precedents, when you get money and you don't have to pay tax on it and it's not considered income, then any of the monies that were used from that free income, that tax-free income, are not tax deductible. So the tax adjustment is equal to the forgiveness. Will you get a Form 1099 related to the forgiveness amount? The IRS came out and said no. If your bank accidentally sends you a Form 1099, you need to inform the bank immediately to get that corrected. Most likely, if you get one in error, it will be a Form 1099-C as in cat, really 1099-C as in cancellation. You will not get one of those. If you do, contact the bank immediately. How long do we have to spend the money if we're self-employed from PPP? It's irrelevant because your PPP forgiveness amount is simply Schedule C from 2019, line 31, divided by 12 times 2.5, period. How many weeks do you have to spend the money if you're an employer? 24 weeks from the date of disbursement. You have to use at least 60% for payroll. The other 40% can be used for rent, utilities, and interest. What is included in the payroll cost for the self-employed? For the self-employed, it is irrelevant because, again, the calculation for forgiveness has nothing to do with what you pay yourself, what you pull yourself out. It's not possible, according to the IRS, for you to be an employee. You have no payroll. You simply achieve forgiveness by taking Schedule C from 2019, line 31, divided by 12 times 2.5. Now, if you are an S corporation, a C corporation, or a partnership, how many weeks do you have to use up PPP? 24 weeks. What, though, is the alternative payroll period, and how does that affect the 24 weeks? Related to rent, utilities, and the interest, that is hardcore 24 weeks from the date of disbursement, 168 days. For payroll, if you are a weekly or bi-weekly employer, as in that's how often you pay your employees, you can use something called the alternative payroll period. It only applies to payroll, not to anything else. The alternative payroll period is not 24 weeks, as in the 24 weeks is the 24 weeks. It doesn't have anything to do with alternative payroll period. The alternative payroll period is simply this. You take your data disbursement, and then you get to start your payroll, if you elect, with the next payroll period, being weekly or bi-weekly, to easily lock it in to the 24-week period. When you have a sole proprietorship, you are filing a Schedule C or Schedule F. That's what that would mean. And you have employees. You will treat the reduction in expenses the same as if you were any other tax structure. So if you got PPP based on your net income and based on what you paid your employees, you will have two calculations, one for the forgiveness based on your net, and then one based on the employee wages that you paid. You total the two together to achieve a dollar amount for PPP forgiveness. What is the 60% calculation? How do you know that you spent at least 60% on payroll? The best way is to look at the Form 3508EZ. You take your total payroll costs divided by 0.6, and that equals then the maximum that you can achieve in forgiveness. Does the self-employed need to do that calculation? No. Why? Because your forgiveness is simply line 31, 2019 Schedule C divided by 12 times 2.5. What documents do you need to provide with your PPP forgiveness application to the bank? For the self-employed, it's Schedule C. If your bank asks, as a self-employed, for you to show payroll and you don't have any employees, you'll need to let them know that you have a video to send them from JJ the CPA, and look for the playlist that says self-employed PPP forgiveness, and then look for the video that says, by law, a self-employed individual cannot be an employee. So for the self-employed, there are no documents to provide. There is nothing to substantiate what you spent the money on. Why? Everybody say it together now. The PPP forgiveness for the self-employed, Schedule C, Schedule F, is simply line 31 divided by 12 times 2.5 from the 2019 Schedule C. For the employers, you will provide one of two things related to payroll. One, if you are using a third-party payroll company, you will provide the payroll reports that you receive from that company for the 24 weeks. It will include all of the information related to what you paid each employee. What I'm doing is I'm pulling one report from the third-party payroll company that shows in one report, this date to this date, 24 weeks, what was the payroll for that period, all in one report. You'll also need to provide, if you did your own, bank statements and check copies to show that you paid it. If you use a third-party administrator, you're providing their reports. If you don't use a third-party company to do your payroll, then you're providing bank statements and check copies to show that you actually made the payroll. Regardless of those two things, you're going to provide your second quarter and third quarter, and depending on when you are filing for forgiveness, which is if it's in 2021, you will provide your fourth quarter Form 941. This is for employers. This is not for self-employed. You'll also provide for second, third, and fourth quarter, if applying next year, the unemployment reports that you're filing with the states for those quarters. Let me be clear. If you're filing for forgiveness in December, you would provide second and third quarter Form 941 and unemployment reports. If you're filing in January or after, the reason you're going to include fourth quarter of both of those items is that, of course, you will have that. As it relates to substantiating the other expenses, rent, utilities, and the interest, you will provide canceled checks, possibly bank statements if requested, as well as the invoices to substantiate it. For a lease, you will turn in a lease copy to show that it was in existence and what the payments are. If you have a loan, you will give the loan documents and the amount of interest that was paid with a report from the bank. Now, know this. Banks may ask for additional information. I'm telling you what is required. If you're a self-employed individual and they're asking for payroll information and they're not accepting only your Schedule C, then hold and wait for your bank to get caught up. No reason to argue with them because they're just simply not correct. There is no payroll for you to provide. Now, for the owners of businesses, this does not include the self-employed. Yes, you are an owner of your company, but how is your forgiveness achieved? Only by a calculation. So for the owners of a C Corp, an S Corp, and a partnership, you have limitations. The first thing I want you to note is that an LLC can be any of these items. The SBA indicated this, and we know the IRS has always said this. An LLC can be a C Corp, can be an S Corp, can be a partnership, can be a sole proprietor, can file Schedule C, can file Schedule E, and it can file Schedule F. LLC has nothing to do with anything related to your forgiveness. The SBA indicated that the rules you follow is based on what you filed in 2019. The limitations for the owners of the S Corp, C Corp, and partnership apply to those that have 5% or more ownership, not 2% as we all originally thought. 5% or more owners have the limitation for the owner compensation. The C Corporation files a Form 1120. For the owner compensation limitation, it is no more than $100,000 in compensation, and it's no more than the wages that were paid in 2019 divided by 12 times 2.5. For the C Corp owner, in addition to up to those wages, is the retirement that was paid for that owner in 2019 and the health insurance that was paid for that owner in 2019. But rest assured, it actually has to have been paid out during the PPP covered period. That 2019 amount for retirement and health insurance is the same. The maximum that can be included is that amount for 2019 divided by 12 times 2.5. For the S Corporation owner, there is one difference compared to the C Corp. But for the S Corporation owner, it is up to $100,000 in annual wages. It is no more than the 2019 amount in wages divided by 12 times 2.5. And the $100,000 in wages, because of a special law related to S corporations, already includes or should include health insurance in the wages. So for the S Corp owner, it's not up to the $100,000 in annualized wages plus health insurance. It's combined. And the only way the S Corp owner gets to include health insurance, first of all, even as a deduction forever and a day, but in the PPP forgiveness, is if it is included in wages. In addition to the wages for the S Corp owner can be the retirement that is paid by the employer, no more than 2019's amount divided by 12 times 2.5. Now, for the partners of a partnership, it is one extra calculation. It is your self-employed income for 2019 divided by 12 times 2.5 times 92.35%. I have a special video on that. Take a look at the playlist to walk you through that calculation. Now, as it relates to the 24 weeks for non-owners, so less than 5% or 0% ownership, it is 24 weeks of payroll, which adds up. Now, let's be clear, when we're talking about the $100,000 limitation, that's for the self-employed, Schedule C, Schedule F, S Corp owner, C Corp owner, partnership. It's $100,000 as your starting figure. Okay, it's not $100,000 included. It's no more than $100,000 divided by 12 times 2.5 is your starting figure. Now, paid and incurred is much less of a concern. However, if you're looking at what do I include in payroll costs, rent, utilities, and interest, meaning I see my 24-week period, how do I know exactly actually what to include? Well, when you go to the beginning of your covered period, go to that moment in time, anything that was paid during the 24 weeks, you include in your PPP forgiveness amount, even if it was an expense that incurred before the covered period. If you got the money July 1st and you paid rent on July 2nd that included back rent from June and May, but because it was paid during the covered period, you get to include it. Now, when you get to the end of your covered period, you are able to include in your PPP forgiveness amount expenses that you paid after the end of the covered period, so long as it actually was incurred during the covered period. Separate example, let's say the end of your covered period has nothing to do with my other examples. If the end of your covered period is July 31st, and on August 1st, you're paying July's rent, you will be able to include that in your PPP forgiveness. If you're paying rent on August 1st for August, you would not be able to include that. As it relates to PPP2, yes, I think there will be a PPP2. It will not be contingent on PPP1, whether you qualified for it and or whether you've already achieved forgiveness. Will there be a qualifier to get PPP2? Yes. It will be most likely something to show that your business was affected financially by COVID by comparing a period of time in 2020 to a period of time in 2019. What you can do to be prepared for that is ensure that you have your books up to date so that you know what your gross income is month by month back to January 2019. What's my advice to clients right now in filing their PPP forgiveness application? It's November 23rd, as I said earlier. For the sake of time, for the sake of expense in the sense of hiring a professional to help, wait until after the next stimulus. Why? See if there's automatic stimulus that literally makes it a waving of the pen and it's over, and avoiding having to gather up documents, prepare it, do a calculation, submit to the bank, go back and forth with the bank. That's what you're avoiding. Also, if there's PPP2, although I think it has nothing to do with PPP1, if there's PPP2 and you got PPP1, Bet your bottom dollar they're going to have a consolidated way to apply for forgiveness. So why not just be aware of that before you file for forgiveness and have to double your efforts? Is there something wrong with filing for PPP forgiveness now? No. Does it change when you'll have to take into account the tax effect related to PPP forgiveness? No. If your bank is up to speed, your bank's easy, boom, you want to go for it, go for it. My advice to my clients is my clients, their circumstances, and knowing those circumstances, knowing who my clients are, and all of them getting 100% commission, 100% forgiveness, we are all waiting, including me. Why not? All right. I think I went through everything. The last thing I'll note to you is that you do have the exposure of an SBA audit related to this. So ensure that your calculations are correct. Ensure that you have documentation to back it all up. I went through what you need. Self-employed, you need a Schedule C. You're done. Employers, bank statements, check copies, payroll reports, the lease, invoices, anything and everything. Keep it all. Even if the bank doesn't need it or want it or request it, keep it all. The bank has FDIC audits that will be reviewing some loans. The SBA will be reviewing PPP loan forgiveness amounts. It's free money. Now, we know that if you got above $2 million, it's an automatic audit. We know that if you got more than $150,000, there's an additional level of gonna probably really want to pay attention to this. If you got less than $150,000, only because statistically, probably not gonna have to worry too much about an inquiry. If you got less than $50,000, just statistically, but it doesn't change the fact that when you're getting money from the government and you don't have to pay it back, there's zero reason to risk anything in terms of what you're putting in for your forgiveness amount. So don't make it any more or less than what it should be. There's a decent potential that you might be the one that gets reviewed. And I don't say this as a scare tactic. I'm saying being aware. So the more information we have, the more documentation you can have. You should achieve full forgiveness. You should achieve full forgiveness. You've had 24 weeks to get it. Okay? The government is hoping you get full forgiveness. Here's the biggest thing I want you to know. Okay? I'm glad you made it to here. And it's not because I think those that made it to here are potentially doing something incorrect. However, here's your final kernel of, oh yeah, the SBA will 100% be able to verify the information for every self-employed filer for forgiveness, because the forgiveness is Schedule C. Where do you file a Schedule C? With the IRS with your individual return. It's one number. The SBA is going to get those numbers sometime next year after you file for 2019, which you've already done. Takes a little while to get in the system, go all through, okay? But right now, the IRS is gathering all that information up to go, here you go, SBA. And the SBA is going to go, okay, for this self-employed individual, here's what we got from the IRS for Schedule C. Divided by 12 times 2.5. Is that what they put in for the forgiveness? Yes, no. No? Here comes a letter of inquiry. What you don't want to risk is they then don't forgive any of it. Now, if you're self-employed and you have employees, well, they're going to know that too, because on Schedule C, you list what your compensation is, but more to the point, those of you that pay wages, which can include the Schedule C, not to yourself, self-employed, you're paying another person as a self-employed W-2 wages. Those wages are included in this comment. For those of you that are paying wages, W-2 wages, whether it's to yourself or your family or your employees. That all gets reported to the Social Security Administration, gets reported to the IRS. It's neat and tidy on a Form W-3. That Form W-3 will be provided to the SBA, and they'll be able to match up and go, okay, here is box 1 of Form W-3 divided by 12 times 2.5 will be one calculation, and taking that amount divided by 52 weeks times 24 weeks for all the employees. They're going to have an algorithm. They're going to be able to know who the owners are, most likely. Why? Because you're the one that signed off on the return. Here's my point. A lot of information going back and forth. Okay? That is verifiable. SBA is not going to know what you paid in rent and utilities, but they do know what you pay in interest most of the time, because the interest that you include is something that has been backed by a mortgage, and the bank sends out a Form 1098 showing the mortgage interest. That is most of what interest will be included. So there is definitely a way that they'll be able to verify all that information. That's good news for you, because if the forgiveness that you put in is going to equal out to what information they have received, there'd be no reason for them to question you at all. I have zero concerns about the SBA and coming to question my clients, because all this information that I just told you will absolutely match up. And guess what? Even if they do inquire, have all the documents. Whatever you give the bank, make sure you retain a copy and have everything else surrounding it. You don't need to be worried about it. You just do it right. Boom. And let the chips fall where they may, and you'll achieve the full forgiveness. All right. Hey, went through a massive crash course. Let me tell you this. I'm getting ready to announce a membership on YouTube, and this was going to be a video part of the membership. So if you found this valuable, and the detail that I provided and the way that I was able to tell you all this information, I had a few notes here, but I don't have a script. I'm not reading this because I'm a practicing CPA of 27 years. The advice I'm giving you here is not meant for you to take it as advice. It's meant for my clients. You're getting this for informational purposes. But guess what? Pretty close. So while I'm not your CPA, I am a CPA, and I'm practicing and advising clients. You get to listen in essence. The membership will take it a step further. There'll be more updates that I won't necessarily put out for the public. There'll just be that much more additional information. So stay tuned for that. Put this out for everybody. Hopefully it helped. Again, there are links to playlists that have videos about each one of these subjects, and links for the self-employed and the employers, as well as to the SBA. All right. Hey, I forgot to ask you in the beginning, I think. But if you haven't subscribed and you made it to here, you know that you want to. You know that you should. I don't make any money off your subscription, but I would love it if you would subscribe. I want you to check out my community page and my story on my YouTube page. I'm not doing videos for the public on stimulus negotiation updates. I'm putting those on my community post, as well as some minor announcements potentially that have come out that don't really warrant a video. Shows that I'm putting out information even if I'm not creating a video for you to pay me. And I appreciate it, but you don't pay me, but the advertisers to pay me 1/10 of a penny for your view, which I appreciate, but I get nothing off the community page. I get nothing off the story. And yes, I am letting you know that that is a difference with me compared to other channels, because I'm not just creating videos to create videos. I'm a CPA providing information for the public, for you. Now, if you would like to schedule a time to visit with me You can go to jjthecpa.com. I don't have that many appointments available each week. I'm not taking on new clients. The rate that I'm charging for you to have a phone consult with me is exactly what I charge my current clients. So it's just one additional way that if you have a deeper need to go through some information, I'm happy to help in that way. All right. Yeah. And special shout out to Sherry. No one knows who Sherry is, but I know who Sherry is. But I just had a consultation with her, and she had a straightforward question that we resolved, and then we spent the rest of the phone call plus some going through a way that potentially could save her and her husband $10,000 a year in taxes that they haven't been doing for the last 28 years. Sherry, no one knows who you are. But I do, and I appreciate that opportunity. All right, hey, thanks for tuning in. I'd love it if you'd subscribe. And then don't you ever forget, you've never met a CPA quite like me. Hey, like and share this video, because all-encompassing crash course from yours truly, JJ the CPA. Hey, I appreciate you, and have a great Thanksgiving if you're watching this before. If you're watching this after Thanksgiving, I hope we're heading into a great end of the year. Hang in there for those that are in a state that's shutting down. I'll have a few videos coming out on some strategies, commentary, motivation, support to help with those circumstances from a CPA's angle. All right. I think I'm late for dinner. Amanda, I'm on my way. All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in.